Elliot Jenkins, 47, worked as a maintenance supervisor in Des Moines, Iowa. Most people believed his ex-wife had outgrown him. They saw a man driving an old Ford pickup carrying a dented lunchbox and wearing the same gray work jacket year after year. To them, he looked ordinary. What they didn't know was that Elliot had spent 2 years protecting one document that could destroy a lie. Then his ex-wife asked the court to reopen their divorce settlement, and Judge Margaret Holloway quietly reached for that document. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. It's always interesting to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy stories about quiet strength courtroom battles and unexpected justice, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Long before anyone argued over documents in a courtroom, Elliot Jenkins and Vanessa Jenkins had been the kind of couple people expected to last. They met in the spring of 2010 at a community fundraiser in Des Moines, Iowa. Elliot was 31 then. He worked for the facilities department that maintained several county-owned buildings. His hands always carried small cuts from tools. His boots usually had dust on them. He was not the type of man who walked into a room and attracted attention. Vanessa did. She was ambitious, energetic, and impossible to ignore. She could speak to a stranger for 5 minutes and leave with a new client, a new opportunity, or a new invitation. People often remembered Vanessa after meeting her once. They often forgot Elliot had been standing beside her. At first, neither of them seemed bothered by that. The relationship worked because each supplied something the other lacked. Vanessa brought energy. Elliot brought stability. When they married 2 years later, they bought a modest 3-bedroom house in West Des Moines for $214,000. The house needed work. The kitchen cabinets were outdated. The deck was rotting. The garage door barely functioned. Most couples would have hired contractors. Elliot spent weekends fixing everything himself. Saturday mornings usually began before sunrise. A pickup truck full of lumber would appear in the driveway. By evening, another piece of the house looked new. Vanessa loved showing visitors the improvements. Few people asked who had actually built them. That never seemed to bother Elliot. He simply kept working. During those years, money was tight. Vanessa was still trying to establish herself in residential real estate. Some months were good. Others were not. When commissions disappeared for weeks, Elliot quietly covered the difference. He accepted overtime assignments, emergency repair calls, weekend shifts, holiday work. Sometimes he left home before dawn and returned after dark. Vanessa often apologized. Elliot would shrug and tell her they were building something together. And for a while they were. The turning point arrived around 2016. The housing market improved. Vanessa's client list expanded. A few successful sales became dozens. Dozens became hundreds. Soon she was earning more money in a month than Elliot earned in several. The success was real. It was earned. Nobody could deny that. But success changed the people surrounding them. Friends who once treated them equally now focused almost entirely on Vanessa. At dinner parties, conversations shifted toward her listings, her sales numbers, her business plans, her awards. People asked Elliot fewer questions each year, sometimes none at all. He would sit quietly at the table while others discussed Vanessa's achievements. He never interrupted, never demanded recognition, never reminded anyone that he had spent years helping her reach that point. The narrator could see something Elliot rarely admitted even to himself. It wasn't jealousy. It was distance. A slow, growing distance. The kind that forms when one person begins moving faster than the relationship can follow. Vanessa opened a larger office. Then she hired assistants, then a marketing consultant, then a social media team. Professional photographs appeared online. Luxury property listings followed. Her name became increasingly visible around central Iowa. Meanwhile, Elliot's life changed very little. He still drove the same Ford F-150. Still packed lunches, still repaired leaking pipes and damaged electrical systems inside county buildings, still wore work boots every day. To outsiders, one spouse appeared to be rising. The other appeared frozen in place. Appearances can be misleading. What nobody saw was what happened after business hours. Vanessa often came home to discover completed projects waiting for her. Tax records organized, invoices sorted, property spreadsheets updated. marketing materials printed, client packets assembled. Elliot never asked for credit. He simply noticed tasks that needed to be done and completed them. That had always been his nature. One evening in late October, Vanessa hosted a gathering at their house. Several real estate professionals attended, the living room filled with expensive watches, tailored jackets, and conversations about investment opportunities. Elliot spent most of the evening refilling trays and cleaning empty glasses. Near the end of the night, he walked into the kitchen and overheard part of a conversation. He wasn't meant to hear it. Neither speaker realized he was nearby. A man laughed and asked Vanessa whether her husband had ever considered joining her business. There was a short pause. Then Vanessa answered, "That's not really Elliot." The response sounded harmless, but she continued, "He's comfortable where he is." The man laughed. "So he's not exactly ambitious?" Vanessa laughed too, only briefly, only a second. But it happened. Elliot stood motionless beside the refrigerator. He heard every word. The comment itself wasn't devastating. What stayed with him was how easy it sounded, how natural, as if the description had been repeated many times before. He quietly returned to the living room carrying fresh drinks. Nobody noticed anything unusual. Nobody knew what he had heard. He never mentioned it. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. That was how Elliot handled disappointment. He stored it away, not out of weakness, out of discipline. Months passed, then more. Vanessa's schedule became increasingly unpredictable. Business trips appeared more frequently. Client meetings stretched later into the evening. Weekend travel became common. Most explanations sounded reasonable, and Elliot wanted to believe them, so he did, at least at first. The narrator could see what Elliot refused to admit. The marriage was beginning to operate like two separate lives, sharing the same address. Conversations became shorter, meals became less frequent, silences became longer, yet Elliot continued doing what he had always done, working, maintaining the house, paying bills, planning for the future, believing patience could solve problems that words could not. One cold February evening, he sat alone at the kitchen table reviewing household expenses. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The house was quiet. Vanessa was attending a conference in Omaha, or at least that was where she said she would be. Elliot wasn't looking for anything unusual. He was simply balancing accounts, a routine task, one he had performed hundreds of times. Then he noticed a charge he didn't recognize. The amount was small, small enough that many people would ignore it. But Elliot wasn't many people. He looked again, then again. A hotel charge, different city, different date, different explanation. The number itself wasn't important. What mattered was that it didn't fit. And Elliot had spent his entire life noticing things that didn't fit. He stared at the screen for several seconds. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, something much colder settled quietly into place. For the first time, Elliot began wondering whether the life he believed he was protecting was already slipping away. And before the month ended, he would discover something that made that single hotel charge look insignificant. The hotel charge sat on Elliot Jenkins' laptop screen long after midnight. Most people would have dismissed it. It was only $187.43, a single transaction, one unfamiliar charge among hundreds of ordinary expenses. But Elliot had spent nearly 2 decades maintaining public buildings. His job depended on noticing details that others overlooked. A strange vibration in an air conditioning unit, a water stain spreading across a ceiling tile, a loose wire hidden behind a wall. Small things often led to larger problems. That habit followed him home. The next morning he reviewed the account again before leaving for work. The charge remained. The location bothered him more than the amount. Kansas City. Vanessa had told him she was attending a 2-day networking conference in Omaha during that same week. Kansas City was nearly 200 miles away. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Elliot wanted there to be one. He closed the laptop and went to work. For several days he said nothing. He watched, waited, listened. That was another habit he had developed over the years. Reacting immediately often destroyed opportunities to learn the truth. People revealed more when they believed nobody was paying attention. A week later, another unusual charge appeared. This one came from a restaurant. Not expensive, not dramatic, but again it was located in a city Vanessa had never mentioned visiting. Elliot stared at the receipt information. Then he opened a spreadsheet. Nothing complicated, just dates, locations, amounts, facts, no assumptions, no accusations, just information. The narrator could see that Elliot still wasn't trying to catch anyone. He was trying to understand. Understanding mattered more than anger. Anger created noise. Information created clarity. By early spring, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Several charges appeared outside Vanessa's stated travel schedule: a hotel in Omaha, a restaurant in Kansas City, fuel purchases in locations that didn't align with client meetings. Each individual item could have been innocent. Together they formed something else, a pattern. One Saturday afternoon, Elliot sat alone in the garage, organizing receipts. The radio played quietly in the background. Sunlight entered through the open garage door. Most people would have spent the day differently, but paperwork relaxed him. Order always had. He was sorting household records when he noticed another inconsistency. This one had nothing to do with hotels. A brokerage statement. The document had arrived electronically. The account balance looked unfamiliar, not dramatically different, just higher than expected. Several $1,000s higher. He checked the previous month's statement, then the month before that, then 6 months back. The growth didn't match normal investment performance. Something else was feeding money into the account. His pulse slowed. Whenever Elliot encountered a problem, he became calmer. The more serious the issue, the quieter he became. He opened additional records, tax documents, investment summaries, transfer confirmations. For nearly 3 hours, he reviewed information. By sunset, one fact became clear. Money had been moving, not disappearing, moving. Transferred between accounts he didn't fully recognize. The accounts were linked to institutions Vanessa handled through her business relationships. That alone wasn't suspicious. Real estate professionals often managed multiple financial accounts, but several transfers lacked explanations. Descriptions were vague. Documentation was incomplete. The transactions seemed intentionally difficult to follow. Elliot printed everything, not because he believed a crime had occurred, because records had value, especially when memories became unreliable. The following Tuesday, he scheduled an appointment with an attorney, not a divorce attorney. Not yet. He simply wanted legal advice regarding financial disclosures inside a marriage. That meeting introduced him to Rebecca Carter. Rebecca's office occupied the 4th floor of a brick building near downtown Des Moines. The receptionist led Elliot into a conference room overlooking Grand Avenue. Rebecca arrived carrying a legal pad. She was in her early 50s, sharp eyes, minimal jewelry, no wasted movement, the kind of attorney who appeared to notice everything. She listened while Elliot explained the financial discrepancies. He spoke calmly, methodically, without exaggeration, without speculation. When he finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "What exactly are you hoping to prove?" she asked. Elliot considered the question. The answer arrived quickly. "Nothing?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "I just want to know what's true." The attorney studied him for several seconds. Then she nodded. "Good answer." She opened the folder he had brought. For the next hour, they reviewed documents together. Rebecca examined each page carefully, occasionally making notes, occasionally asking questions. At one point, she placed her pen down. "Have you confronted your wife about any of this?" "No." "Why not?" Elliot looked toward the window, because the honest answer sounded strange. "If I'm wrong, I don't want to accuse her." Rebecca nodded again. "And if you're right?" Elliot was silent. Eventually, he answered. "Then I need facts before I speak." The attorney closed the folder. "Keep doing exactly that." "What?" "Collect facts." She slid the documents back across the table. "No accusations, no emotional confrontations, no guessing." Elliot listened carefully. "Document everything," Rebecca continued. "Every statement, every transfer, every account summary, every email." She paused. People remember conversations differently. Documents don't. Those words stayed with Elliot long after he left the office. Over the next several months, he followed that advice, meticulously. He created digital copies of records, paper copies of records, chronological folders, backups, duplicates. The system wasn't complicated, just organized. And because Elliot was organizing information rather than searching for betrayal, he noticed things others might have missed. One transfer led to another. One statement referenced another account. One account referenced a different institution. Each discovery created another question. The distance inside the marriage continued growing. Vanessa traveled more frequently. Dinner conversations became shorter. Some evenings they barely spoke at all. Still, Elliot said nothing. Not because he was afraid, because he wasn't finished learning. Then came the transaction, the one Rebecca would later describe as the moment everything changed. It appeared on a Thursday evening in late August. Elliot had just finished replacing a broken fence panel behind the house. He showered, made coffee, opened his laptop, and found a transfer confirmation. The amount was larger than anything he had seen before, $87,500. The money moved through an investment account connected to Vanessa's financial network. The transfer description contained a reference number. Nothing unusual, except Elliot had never seen that account number before. Not once. Not in years of tax filings. Not in household financial summaries. Not anywhere. The account existed. The money existed. But somehow the account had remained invisible. Elliot printed the confirmation, then printed it again. He placed both copies on the kitchen table. The house was silent. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the darkness. Inside, Elliot stared at the paper. Not angry, not shocked, just focused. Very focused. Because for the first time, he was no longer looking at inconsistencies. He was looking at something concrete, something real, something that suggested parts of his financial life had been hidden from him. And before the year ended, he would learn exactly how much had been hidden and how far Vanessa was willing to go to keep it that way. The divorce did not begin with shouting. It began with a calendar invitation. On a rainy Tuesday morning in April, Elliot Jenkins opened his email before leaving for work and found a message from Vanessa. The subject line contained only 3 words. "We need changes." Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just 3 words. He read the email twice while standing in his kitchen. Vanessa wanted to discuss the future of their marriage. She suggested meeting after work. The message was polite, almost professional. That detail bothered him more than anger would have. After 12 years together, politeness felt unfamiliar. That evening they sat across from each other at their dining room table, the same table Elliot had refinished with his own hands 6 years earlier. Outside rain tapped against the windows. Inside neither touched the coffee sitting between them. Vanessa spoke first. Her voice remained calm, measured, prepared. She said she felt they had grown apart. She said their lives were moving in different directions. She said neither of them seemed happy anymore. Elliot listened. He asked few questions. The narrator could see what was happening inside him. Not panic, not denial, recognition. Part of him had been expecting this conversation for months, perhaps longer. The marriage had been fading one small piece at a time. Now someone was finally naming it. When Vanessa finished speaking, Elliot looked down at the tabletop. The wood grain appeared darker under the kitchen light. "Is there someone else?" he asked. Vanessa paused, only briefly. Then she shook her head. "No." Elliot studied her expression. Years of maintenance work had taught him something useful. Most problems revealed themselves indirectly, not through what was said, through what wasn't. The answer felt incomplete, but he didn't press further. The conversation ended less than an hour later. No yelling, no broken dishes, no dramatic exit, just silence. 3 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. The filing listed irreconcilable differences. Nothing unusual, nothing sensational. The paperwork transformed 12 years of marriage into a stack of legal documents. Elliot placed them neatly inside a folder. Then he called Rebecca Carter. By the following month, mediation sessions had begun. The meetings took place in a professional office building near downtown Des Moines. Large conference rooms, neutral colors, coffee stations, artificial calm, everything designed to reduce conflict. The first session revealed something Elliot found surprising. Vanessa seemed impatient, not angry, not emotional, impatient. She wanted the process completed quickly, very quickly. Rebecca noticed it too. Several times, Vanessa pushed for immediate decisions, immediate signatures, immediate agreements. Whenever financial disclosures were mentioned, she encouraged everyone to keep things simple. The narrator could see Rebecca becoming increasingly attentive. Experienced attorneys recognized patterns, and speed often had a purpose, especially during divorces involving money. During the second mediation session, Cameron Reed entered the process. Vanessa had hired him as her attorney. Cameron was known throughout Central Iowa. Expensive suits, perfectly rehearsed confidence, a reputation for aggressive negotiation. He entered rooms expecting to win, and people often let him. The first thing Cameron did was establish a narrative, a story. In his version of events, Vanessa was a successful professional carrying most of the marriage's financial burden. Elliot was portrayed as a decent man, honest, hardworking, but financially unsophisticated. The language sounded polite, yet the implication was obvious. One spouse understood money, the other did not. Elliot listened without reacting. Rebecca occasionally made notes. Nothing more. The negotiations continued for weeks. Every asset was reviewed. The West Des Moines house, retirement accounts, savings accounts, brokerage investments, vehicles, insurance policies, credit card balances, home equity, everything. Or at least that was the expectation. One afternoon, Cameron presented a proposed settlement structure. The arrangement surprised Rebecca. Several provisions favored Vanessa, substantially. The family home would remain with her. A large portion of liquid assets would remain under her control. Certain investment holdings would not be divided equally. Rebecca reviewed the proposal carefully. Then she looked at Elliot. Many clients would have become angry. Many would have demanded immediate resistance. Elliot did neither. He simply asked questions, patient questions, specific questions, questions about account values, questions about documentation, questions about disclosure requirements. The more questions he asked, the quieter Cameron became. Not uncomfortable, just cautious. Meanwhile, Vanessa seemed eager to finish. Every discussion returned to the same theme. Move forward, sign the papers, end the process. The pressure increased as summer approached. Several mediation sessions stretched into the evening. Deadlines appeared. Revisions circulated. Drafts multiplied. Still, Elliot continued reviewing everything, one page at a time, one figure at a time. Rebecca admired that. Many clients allowed emotions to overwhelm judgment. Elliot did not. Then came a meeting that changed the direction of everything. It occurred in late July. The parties gathered to review final settlement language. Most of the agreement appeared standard, nothing unusual, until Rebecca reached a particular section. She read it twice, then a third time. The clause concerned financial disclosures, specifically acknowledgement of financial disclosures. Rebecca circled the paragraph with her pen. "Interesting," she said. Cameron smiled. "It's standard." "Not exactly." The room became quieter. Rebecca tapped the page. The language stated that both parties acknowledged receiving complete financial disclosures from one another. It further stated that each party had sufficient opportunity to investigate financial information before signing. Legally, the clause carried significant weight, because once signed, claiming ignorance became much harder. Rebecca turned toward Elliot. He understood immediately. The clause mattered. A lot. The negotiations continued. Hours passed. Eventually, everyone appeared ready to finalize the settlement. But before the meeting ended, Elliot made an unexpected request, his first unusual request during the entire divorce. Rebecca looked surprised. Even Cameron seemed curious. "I'd like an additional acknowledgement document," Elliot said. Cameron frowned. "What kind? A separate confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" Elliot folded his hands on the conference table. that all financial disclosures were received and reviewed voluntarily. The room became silent, not hostile, just still. Cameron glanced toward Vanessa, then back toward Elliot. The request seemed unnecessary, redundant, perhaps even strange, which was exactly why Elliot wanted it. He wasn't trying to trap anyone. He was trying to eliminate future ambiguity. Rebecca immediately understood. A separate acknowledgement would create an independent record, something difficult to reinterpret later, something difficult to forget. Cameron initially resisted, then reconsidered. After all, if the disclosures were complete, what difference would another signature make? Eventually, he agreed. The document would be prepared, formal, specific, notarized, every signature verified, every page numbered, every attachment referenced. Elliot said very little after that, but for the first time in months, Rebecca saw something unusual in him. Not relief, not satisfaction, preparation. The same expression she imagined appearing before a man reinforced a bridge before a storm, not because he expected disaster, because preparation cost less than repair. Weeks later, the final signing took place. Documents covered the conference table. Hundreds of pages, initials, signatures, dates, witnesses, notaries. The marriage officially ended that afternoon. Everyone stood. Hands were shaken. Files were gathered. People prepared to leave. Then Elliot quietly signed one final document, the additional acknowledgement, the separate confirmation. The document no one else seemed particularly interested in. At the time, it looked like a minor administrative form, an unnecessary precaution, a footnote to a completed divorce. Years later, an entire courtroom would discover how wrong that assumption had been. The divorce became official on a Thursday morning in September. At 10:17 a.m., a judge signed the final order. 12 years of marriage ended with a stamp, a signature, and a case number. Elliot Jenkins left the courthouse carrying a cardboard document box. Nothing more. No dramatic confrontation. No final argument in the hallway. No attempt to change anyone's mind. Just paperwork. The sky above Des Moines was overcast when he walked to his truck. The old Ford F-150 started on the second turn of the key, just as it always had. Elliot sat behind the wheel for several minutes before driving away. Not because he was overwhelmed, because silence felt appropriate. When a building stood for decades and finally came down, there was often dust, there was often noise, but sometimes there was only empty space. That was what the end of the marriage felt like. Empty space. Over the next month, Elliot moved into a modest apartment near the east side of the city. The building was older but well-maintained. Red brick exterior, 3 floors, a small parking lot. Nothing luxurious, nothing impressive. The rent was affordable. The commute to work took 15 minutes. That was enough. Most of the furniture came from the house he had once shared with Vanessa. A couch, a dining table, a bookshelf, a coffee maker. The apartment looked less like a fresh start and more like the remaining pieces of a previous life. Elliot didn't mind. He had never measured success through appearances. On his first evening there, he unpacked the fireproof lockbox. The box was black steel, about the size of a small briefcase, heavy, scratched along the corners. Inside were documents, nothing valuable to most people. No stacks of cash, no jewelry, no collectibles, just paper, folders, records, signed agreements, disclosure forms, account summaries, correspondence, years of information, carefully organized, chronologically arranged, every page labeled, every document preserved. The narrator could see something important. Elliot never opened the box because he wanted revenge. He opened it because order brought him peace. Knowing where things belonged made the world easier to understand. After placing the lockbox inside a closet shelf, he closed the door and continued unpacking. Life moved forward, or at least it appeared to. At work, little changed. The Polk County Civic Center still needed maintenance. Air conditioning systems still failed. Water heaters still leaked. Hallway lights still burned out. Elliot returned to his routine immediately. By 6 each morning, he was usually walking through service corridors, carrying a tool bag and a clipboard. Most coworkers knew about the divorce. Nobody asked many questions, partly because Elliot wasn't the type to discuss personal matters, partly because people assumed they already understood the situation. The story seemed obvious. Vanessa had become successful. Elliot had not. Vanessa moved on. Elliot got left behind. Simple, convenient, wrong, but assumptions often are. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life appeared to improve rapidly, at least from the outside. Friends posted photographs online, networking events, award ceremonies, business conferences, luxury restaurants. A new Lexus SUV appeared within months. Then came photographs of a renovated office, new furniture, new branding, new marketing campaigns. The comments beneath those photos followed a familiar pattern. Congratulations, you deserve it. Amazing success story. So proud of you. Nobody mentioned Elliot. The chapter involving him seemed finished. The narrator could see what most people could not. Elliot occasionally saw those same photographs, not because he searched for them, because mutual acquaintances shared them, tagged them, discussed them. Each image reinforced a public narrative. One person rising, one person fading away. Yet every time he saw one, Elliot simply continued with his day. No angry messages, no bitter comments, no attempts to defend himself. The divorce had already consumed enough energy. He refused to give it more. Winter arrived, then Christmas, then a new year. The routine remained steady. Work, home, books, projects, coffee, quiet. There was comfort in predictability. One Saturday afternoon in January, Elliot received a phone call. The caller ID surprised him. Daniel Jenkins, Vanessa's son from a previous relationship, 20 years old now, nearly 21. Elliot had helped raise him since middle school, taught him how to drive, helped with homework, attended football games, showed him how to change brake pads, fix plumbing, manage money. Legally, Daniel was no longer connected to Elliot. Emotionally, that was different. Relationships don't always disappear when paperwork says they should. Elliot? Hey, Daniel. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel laughed softly. Still feels weird calling you Elliot. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, mostly ordinary topics: college, work, life, future plans. Neither discussed the divorce in detail. They didn't need to. The connection remained. That was enough. When the call ended, Elliot felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Not because things were improving, because not everything had been lost. Some parts of life survived change. Some relationships survived paperwork. That realization mattered. Spring arrived. Then summer. Nearly 2 years passed. The divorce faded into the background. The legal files remained untouched inside the fireproof box. Dust collected on the shelf. Life became ordinary again, which was exactly how Elliot preferred it. Then, on a humid afternoon in June, something unusual happened. A former co-worker called him unexpectedly. The man's name was Brian McCall. Years earlier, Brian had worked with a regional financial services company. Now he managed operations for a private investment group. The two men hadn't spoken in over a year. Elliot, Brian said. I wasn't sure if I should call. That sentence immediately caught Elliot's attention. People usually called with information or requests, rarely uncertainty. What is it? A pause followed. Then Brian lowered his voice. Have you heard anything about Vanessa's investment accounts lately? Elliot sat upright. No. Another pause. Brian sounded uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't even be mentioning this. Elliot waited. Eventually, Brian continued. I attended a financial planning conference in Cedar Rapids last week. So, I heard her name. That alone meant little. Vanessa worked in real estate. People discussed her frequently. But Brian wasn't finished. There was a conversation about account restructuring. Elliot remained silent. The numbers caught my attention. What numbers? The answer arrived, slowly, as though Brian regretted saying it. Several $100,000. Elliot stared through their apartment window. The parking lot below remained quiet. Children rode bicycles across the sidewalk. A delivery truck pulled away from the curb. Ordinary life continued. Meanwhile, something old stirred awake. The same instinct he had felt years earlier. The instinct that noticed details. The instinct that paid attention when something didn't fit. "Are you sure?" Elliot asked. "No," Brian answered honestly. "But I thought you should know." The call ended shortly afterward. Elliot remained seated at the kitchen table. For several minutes he didn't move. Then he stood, walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, reached for the fireproof lockbox. The metal felt cold against his hands. He carried it into the living room, set it on the table, unlocked it. For the first time in almost 2 years, he began reviewing the documents again. Not because he was looking for trouble, because trouble had just knocked on his door. And deep inside that box sat a collection of papers that might soon become far more important than anyone realized. The fireproof lockbox weighed less than 20 pounds, yet when Elliot Jenkins carried it from the closet to his kitchen table, it felt heavier than that. Not physically, mentally. Because inside that black steel box sat the last complete record of a chapter he had spent 2 years trying to leave behind. The apartment was quiet. Outside, summer sunlight reflected off parked cars in the lot below. Inside, Elliot unlocked the box and began removing folders. Blue folders, gray folders, white folders, each labeled in black marker. Dates, account names, settlement records, correspondence, everything arranged in chronological order. The narrator could see a familiar pattern. Whenever uncertainty appeared, Elliot returned to documentation. Not emotion, not assumptions. Documentation. The first folder contained standard divorce paperwork, nothing unusual. Property division schedules, tax records, asset disclosures, retirement statements. The second folder contained mediation records, meeting summaries, draft proposals, attorney notes. Again, nothing remarkable. Then Elliot reached for a manila envelope positioned beneath several larger files. Unlike the others, this envelope carried no printed label, only handwritten words. Final acknowledgement. The envelope looked ordinary. Worn edges, fold marks, a coffee stain near one corner. Nobody seeing it for the first time would have considered it important. Yet Elliot knew better. He opened it carefully. Inside sat the document Rebecca Carter had insisted he preserve. The additional acknowledgement signed at the conclusion of the divorce. The document everyone else had considered unnecessary. The document Cameron Reed had nearly refused to prepare. The document Vanessa had signed without hesitation. Elliot removed the first page, then the second, then the third. Every page remained exactly where he had left it. Nothing missing, nothing altered. The acknowledgement itself was surprisingly specific, far more specific than standard settlement language. That had been Rebecca's idea. General wording created opportunities for future arguments. Precise wording prevented them. The first section confirmed that both parties had received complete financial disclosures before signing the settlement. The second section confirmed that each party had been given adequate time to review those disclosures. The third section confirmed that no additional information had been requested. The fourth section confirmed that all disclosed assets had been voluntarily reviewed and accepted. Every page contained initials. Every signature was notarized. Every attachment was referenced by exhibit number. The narrator could see why Rebecca had been so careful. She wasn't preparing for the present. She was preparing for the future. Experienced attorneys understood something many people didn't. Divorce often ends legally, long before it ends emotionally. And emotional disputes frequently return years later, wearing legal disguises. Elliot continued reviewing the documents. Attached behind the acknowledgement sat a packet of supporting records. Those records mattered just as much, maybe more. The first attachment was a receipt confirming delivery of financial disclosures, certified mail, tracking number included. The next attachment contained email correspondence, nothing dramatic, simple confirmations, professional language, dates, times, records. One email stood out immediately. Vanessa had sent it 3 weeks before the settlement became final. The message was short, only 2 paragraphs, but the wording was clear. She confirmed receipt of financial statements. She confirmed review of account summaries. She confirmed understanding of settlement terms. There was no ambiguity, no confusion, no unanswered question. The email existed. The timestamp existed. The record existed. Facts, not memories, not interpretations. Facts. Elliot placed the email aside and continued. Several additional pages followed. Brokerage disclosures, investment summaries, account schedules, property valuations, everything referenced by exhibit number, everything linked to the acknowledgement. As he reviewed the records, something became increasingly obvious. The financial account Brian McCall had mentioned during the phone call wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Not anymore. The account number appeared inside the packet, buried within pages of disclosures, easy to overlook, easy to forget, but definitely present. Elliot stared at the number, then compared it to older records. Same account, same institution, same disclosure. A slow breath escaped him. If the account had been disclosed during the divorce, why would anyone claim otherwise? Later, the question lingered, and the answer worried him, because there were only two possibilities. Either someone had forgotten, or someone intended to pretend they had forgotten. Neither option felt good. That evening, Elliot called Rebecca Carter. The attorney answered after the second ring. "Everything okay?" "I found something." Rebecca became quiet. "What kind of something?" "The account." A pause. "What account?" "The one Brian mentioned." Rebecca immediately understood. "The investment account." "Yes." Another pause followed. The narrator could imagine Rebecca sitting behind her desk, already thinking several steps ahead. "What did you find?" "It was disclosed." "You're sure?" "I checked twice." Rebecca didn't respond immediately. That silence told Elliot everything. The information mattered. A lot. Finally, she spoke. "Do you still have all supporting documents?" "Yes." "The emails?" "Yes." "The certified delivery records?" "Yes." "The acknowledgement?" "Yes." Rebecca released a slow breath. "Good." Her tone changed slightly. Not relieved, prepared. "Keep everything exactly where it is." "I wasn't planning to move it." "Good." More silence. Then Rebecca asked a question that seemed strange at first. "Do you still have the notary information?" Elliot thought for a moment, then opened the packet again. The answer appeared at the bottom of the final page. Notary identification number, commission record, date, location, everything. "Yes." "Excellent." "Why?" Rebecca hesitated, because experienced attorneys rarely made predictions without evidence, but the narrator could see what she was beginning to suspect. "If someone ever challenges this settlement," she said carefully, "those records become extremely important." Elliot looked down at the documents spread across his table. The acknowledgement, the emails, the disclosures, the signatures, the notary information, the attachments, all preserved because he disliked throwing paperwork away. The irony wasn't lost on him. People had laughed at his filing system for years. Co-workers joked about it. Friends teased him. Even Vanessa had rolled her eyes occasionally. Yet here they were, 2 years later, and those records remained intact, while memories had already begun fading. After ending the call, Elliot spent another hour reviewing the contents of the envelope. Not because he doubted them, because he wanted to understand exactly what existed, exactly what could be proven, exactly what could not. By the time darkness settled outside, he had organized every page into a new binder. Plastic sheet protectors, tabs, labels, everything easy to access, easy to follow, easy to explain. When he finally closed the binder, he felt something unusual. Not fear, not confidence, awareness. The awareness that certain documents become valuable only when someone tries to challenge them. Most evidence spends years sitting quietly, ignored, unremarkable. Then one day, a dispute arrives, and suddenly those forgotten pages become more important than all the arguments in the room. Before returning the binder to the lockbox, Elliot noticed a sticky note attached to the inside cover. The note had been written by Rebecca shortly after the divorce. The handwriting was small and precise, Only one sentence. Someday this envelope may be worth more than any asset listed inside it. At the time, Elliot had considered the remark overly cautious. Now he wasn't so sure, because somewhere beyond the walls of his apartment, events were already moving toward him. And if Rebecca's instincts were correct, someone would soon try to rewrite a history that these documents had preserved perfectly. The motion arrived on a Monday morning. At 8:14 a.m., Elliot Jenkins was standing on a ladder replacing fluorescent light fixtures in a hallway inside the Polk County Civic Center. The building was quiet. Most employees had not yet arrived. A maintenance cart sat nearby. A toolbox rested on the floor beneath him. Everything about the morning felt ordinary. Then his phone vibrated inside his jacket pocket. Elliot ignored it. Work came first. The phone vibrated again 30 seconds later. Then a third time. That was unusual. He climbed down from the ladder and checked the screen. 3 missed calls, all from Rebecca Carter. His stomach tightened. Rebecca rarely called repeatedly unless something required immediate attention. He stepped into an empty conference room and returned the call. Rebecca answered immediately. Elliot. Her voice sounded controlled, professional, which usually meant the situation was serious. What happened? There was a brief pause. Then she said 4 words. We have a problem. Elliot closed the conference room door. What kind of problem? Rebecca didn't waste time. Vanessa filed a motion. What motion? Another pause. Then came the sentence that instantly transformed the morning. She wants the court to reopen the divorce settlement. Silence filled the room. Not because Elliot was shocked, because he wanted to understand exactly what that meant. After nearly 2 years, the divorce felt finished, closed, resolved. The idea of reopening it seemed absurd, yet Rebecca wouldn't be calling if it were impossible. What is she claiming? Elliot asked. Rebecca sighed. Hidden assets. The words landed heavily, not because they were true, because they were serious. Family courts treated allegations of concealed assets differently than ordinary disputes. If proven, they could reopen settlements, modify distributions, create years of additional litigation. Elliot walked toward a window overlooking the parking lot. Outside, employees continued arriving for work. Nobody knew his life had just changed. Specifically, he asked. Rebecca opened a file on her end. I have the motion in front of me. Elliot waited. She alleges you intentionally concealed investment holdings during settlement negotiations. The accusation sounded almost surreal. Of all people, Elliot Jenkins being accused of hiding money seemed ridiculous. His financial life was so organized that even old utility bills were archived by year. Yet allegations didn't need to be logical. They only needed to be filed. What amount? Elliot asked. Rebecca hesitated, then answered. Approximately $640,000. The number echoed in the room. 640,000. Large enough to attract attention. Large enough to create headlines if someone wanted publicity. Large enough to convince people there might be something worth investigating. Elliot remained silent. The narrator could see what Rebecca appreciated most about him. He didn't panic. He didn't become angry. He processed information, step by step. What account? He asked. Rebecca read directly from the filing. Then she recited a familiar account number. The same account number Elliot had reviewed only days earlier. The same account disclosed years before. The same account listed inside the acknowledgement packet. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rebecca asked the question she already suspected she knew the answer to. Recognize it? Yes. Thought so. Another silence followed. Rebecca finally spoke again. Do you still have the envelope? The question almost made Elliot smile. Not because the situation was funny, because it confirmed exactly what he had been thinking. The envelope mattered. Yes. Everything. Everything. The acknowledgement. Yes. The disclosures. Yes. The emails. Yes. The certified delivery records. All of it. Rebecca exhaled slowly. The first sign of relief Elliot had heard all morning. Good. Then her voice hardened. Very good. The call lasted another 20 minutes. Rebecca explained the allegations in greater detail. According to Vanessa's filing, she had only recently become aware of the account. The motion claimed she never received adequate disclosure, never understood the account's existence, never had a fair opportunity to evaluate it during settlement negotiations. The language was carefully written, strategic, specific, designed to sound reasonable, designed to create doubt. Elliot listened carefully. The narrator could see the contradiction forming in his mind. The filing wasn't merely inaccurate. It directly conflicted with documents Vanessa herself had signed. That detail mattered, a lot, because courts tolerated mistakes. They were less tolerant of contradictions. After ending the call, Elliot returned to work, at least physically. Mentally, his focus had shifted elsewhere. He replaced light fixtures, checked maintenance logs, completed inspections. Yet part of his attention remained fixed on the motion, not the accusation itself, the decision behind it. Someone had chosen to file that claim. Someone had reviewed those allegations. Someone believed they could survive scrutiny. That meant one of two things. Either they genuinely believed the account had been hidden, or they believed evidence no longer existed. The second possibility concerned him more, because it suggested someone was counting on time, counting on lost records, counting on faded memories. Unfortunately for them, Elliot had spent 2 years preserving both. That afternoon, whispers began circulating. The courthouse was full of attorneys, court clerks, administrative staff. Information traveled quickly, especially when legal filings involved unusual allegations. By lunchtime, several employees had heard that Elliot's ex-wife was taking him back to court. Nobody knew details, only fragments. But fragments were enough. People started looking at him differently. The maintenance supervisor accused of hiding $640,000. The irony would have been amusing under different circumstances. One coworker approached him near the loading dock. "Hey, Elliot." "Yeah." The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Heard you're secretly rich." Elliot laughed softly, the first genuine laugh of the day. "If I am, nobody told me." The coworker laughed too. The moment passed, but the narrator could see something important. Rumors move faster than truth. They always have. The accusation itself had already begun creating consequences. Not legal consequences, social ones, questions, speculation, assumptions. That was exactly why documentation mattered. By evening, Elliot sat across from Rebecca inside her office. The motion lay open on the conference table between them. Rebecca had highlighted key sections: yellow, blue, pink. The document looked less like a legal filing and more like a battlefield map. She reviewed every allegation carefully, every claim, every assertion, every date. The more they examined the filing, the more inconsistencies appeared. Several timelines didn't align. Certain statements conflicted with existing records. One paragraph appeared especially problematic. Rebecca tapped it with her pen. "Read this." Elliot did, then read it again. The section claimed Vanessa first became aware of the account approximately 8 months earlier. Rebecca watched him. "Notice anything?" Yes." "What?" Elliot looked up. "That's impossible." Rebecca nodded. "Exactly. Because 8 months before that alleged discovery, Vanessa had already signed documentation specifically referencing the account. Not indirectly, directly. The contradiction sat in plain sight, hidden only from people who hadn't preserved records, which brought them back to the envelope. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the meeting began, she looked genuinely confident. Not optimistic. Confident. "Someone made a mistake." Elliot folded his hands. "Who?" Rebecca closed the motion. The sound echoed softly across the room. "I don't know yet." Then she offered a faint smile. "But I know where we're going to find out." Outside the office window, downtown Des Moines glowed beneath the evening lights. Traffic moved through intersections. People headed home. Life continued normally. Meanwhile, a legal battle that should never have existed had officially begun. And somewhere on the other side of the city, Vanessa and her attorney believed they were reopening a closed chapter. What neither of them realized was that Elliot still possessed something more dangerous than money. He possessed a complete record, and records don't forget. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early September. At 8:32 a.m., Elliot Jenkins parked his aging Ford F-150 in a public lot 3 blocks from the Polk County Courthouse. The truck was 20 years old. The paint had faded in places. The driver's seat showed signs of wear. The air conditioner worked only when it wanted to. Elliot never cared. A vehicle's purpose was transportation, nothing more. He turned off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. Not nervous, focused, the same way he felt before repairing a complicated electrical system. Preparation was finished. Now came execution. Across town, attorneys were likely reviewing arguments, reviewing exhibits, reviewing strategies. Elliot had spent the previous week doing something simpler. He reviewed facts. Facts required less imagination. At exactly 8:45, he entered the courthouse carrying a worn, brown leather briefcase. The briefcase looked almost as old as the truck. One corner had been repaired with stitching years earlier. The handle showed cracks from use. To most people it appeared outdated, ordinary, forgettable. Inside, however, sat documents capable of deciding the entire case. The narrator could see the irony. The most valuable item in the courtroom that day might be carried inside the least impressive bag. Rebecca Carter met him near the security checkpoint. She wore a navy suit and carried 3 thick binders. Unlike Elliot, she appeared energized, not excited, prepared. Good attorneys often enjoyed situations where facts strongly supported their client. And Rebecca liked facts. "Morning," she said. "Morning. You sleep? A little?" She nodded. "That's more than most people before a hearing." Together they walked toward courtroom 4B. The hearing wasn't expected to last all day. Officially, it concerned only a motion, a request. Nothing had been decided yet. But everyone understood the stakes. If the court agreed to reopen the settlement, months of litigation could follow, possibly years. If the motion failed, the case would effectively end. 1 hearing, 2 very different futures. When they entered the courtroom, several people were already seated. Court clerks moved between tables. Attorneys organized files. Observers occupied the rear benches. A few local lawyers had come simply to watch. Unusual family court motions often attracted attention, especially those involving allegations of hidden assets. Rebecca guided Elliot toward their table. He sat quietly and placed the briefcase beside his chair. From there, he could see the opposite side of the room. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later. The narrator observed her only through Elliot's perspective, not her thoughts, not her emotions, only what Elliot saw. She looked confident, professional, carefully prepared. Her clothing was expensive, her posture controlled. She walked beside Cameron Reed without hesitation. Nothing about her appearance suggested uncertainty. Cameron looked exactly as Elliot remembered. Tailored charcoal suit, perfectly arranged tie, confident smile. The kind of attorney who enjoyed occupying a courtroom. Several people greeted him immediately. He responded comfortably, as though he belonged at the center of attention. Perhaps he did. For years, that reputation had worked in his favor. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the courtroom doors closed. Moments later, Judge Margaret Holloway entered. Everyone stood. The room immediately changed. The casual conversations vanished. Papers stopped moving. Chairs became still. Judge Holloway possessed that effect. She wasn't loud. She wasn't theatrical. She simply expected discipline, and usually received it. After reviewing preliminary matters, she turned toward Cameron. "Counselor, you may proceed." Cameron stood smoothly, confidently, prepared. He approached the podium and began speaking. The narrator could see what he was doing almost immediately. He wasn't starting with evidence. He was building a narrative. Stories matter in court. Not because stories replace evidence, because stories help people interpret evidence. Cameron's story was carefully designed. According to his presentation, Vanessa had entered the divorce at a disadvantage. She relied upon disclosures provided by Elliot. She trusted information presented during negotiations. Only later, according to the argument, did she discover significant financial assets had not been adequately revealed. The language sounded reasonable, measured, professional. That was intentional. Direct accusations often create resistance. Reasonable concerns create curiosity. Several observers nodded while listening. The story made sense, at least initially. Cameron continued. He described an investment account valued at approximately $640,000. He emphasized the size of the account, repeated the number several times. Large numbers attract attention. Large numbers create impressions. That was strategy. Then he turned slightly and gestured toward Elliot. Not aggressively, subtly. Yet the implication remained clear. This quiet maintenance supervisor supposedly concealed hundreds of thousands of dollars during settlement negotiations. The contrast was powerful, and Cameron knew it. The narrator could see several people looking toward Elliot, perhaps imagining hidden wealth, secret investments, financial deception. Appearances often influence assumptions. A man wearing an old gray suit rarely looks like someone managing $640,000. Ironically, that helped Cameron's argument, because unexpected stories attract interest. Judge Holloway listened without expression. No reaction, no interruption, nothing. Experienced judges reveal very little. That silence often unsettled attorneys. Not Cameron, at least not yet. For nearly 40 minutes he presented his case. Financial summaries appeared on monitors. Account statements were displayed. Transfer records highlighted. Selected dates emphasized. Everything organized to support a single conclusion. The settlement deserved reconsideration. The motion deserved approval. When Cameron finally returned to his seat, the courtroom felt different. The allegation now existed publicly, visibly, formally. Rebecca stood. She approached the podium carrying only a legal pad. No stack of exhibits, no dramatic display, just notes. The contrast was striking. She began quietly, almost conversationally. First she reviewed procedural history, dates, orders, settlement records. Nothing exciting, nothing emotional. Several observers appeared confused. Why wasn't she attacking the allegations directly? Why wasn't she fighting? Because Rebecca understood timing. Facts introduced too early often lose impact. First establish foundation, then build. Judge Holloway listened carefully, occasionally making notes, occasionally turning pages. Rebecca continued. Then she asked a simple question. Your Honor, may I clarify one issue regarding disclosure? The judge nodded. Proceed. Rebecca turned toward the monitor displaying the investment account. The account referenced by opposing counsel. She paused. Would the court agree that the central question is whether that account was disclosed? Cameron immediately stood. That's an oversimplification. Rebecca didn't even look at him. Isn't it? The question lingered. Judge Holloway glanced toward Cameron, then back toward Rebecca. Answer the question, counselor. For the first time all morning, Cameron hesitated, only briefly. But Elliot noticed. So did Rebecca. And perhaps so did the judge, because suddenly the case felt slightly different. Not resolved, not won, different. The courtroom no longer revolved around the existence of the account. Now it revolved around disclosure, a much narrower issue, a much more dangerous issue, because disclosure either happened or it didn't. Facts would determine that. Not arguments, not impressions. Facts. Rebecca returned to counsel table. The morning session ended shortly afterward. Judge Holloway announced a brief recess before evidence review. People stood. Conversations resumed. Observers stretched their legs. Attorneys gathered documents. Across the room, Cameron appeared less relaxed than before, only slightly. But Elliot noticed. Years of observing details made subtle changes easier to recognize. Rebecca sat beside him. She opened one of her binders, then looked at the old leather briefcase resting near Elliot's chair. The next part matters, she said. Elliot nodded. I know. Rebecca glanced toward the opposite side of the courtroom, then back toward him. Do you still have it with you? Elliot rested one hand on the briefcase. the same briefcase most people had ignored all morning. Yes. Rebecca smiled faintly. Good. Because inside that worn leather case sat the one thing nobody had discussed yet, the one thing capable of changing the entire hearing. And before the day ended, Judge Holloway was going to see it. The hearing resumed at 10:42 a.m. People returned to their seats. Coffee cups disappeared beneath tables. Legal pads reopened. Court clerks settled behind computer screens. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B felt noticeably different than it had before the recess. The reason was simple. The argument had narrowed. During the morning, Cameron Reed had attempted to frame the case around hidden wealth. Now the focus rested on a much more specific question. Had the investment account been disclosed during the divorce, Judge Margaret Holloway took her seat and immediately called the hearing back to order. Rebecca Carter stood. The attorney carried a thin binder instead of the thick stacks Cameron had used earlier. That decision was intentional. Sometimes fewer documents create greater impact. Rebecca approached the podium. Your Honor, I would like to discuss the timeline presented in the motion. Judge Holloway nodded. Proceed. Rebecca turned toward the large display monitor. Several exhibits remained visible from Cameron's earlier presentation. Investment statements, transfer summaries, account histories. Rebecca pointed toward one highlighted date. Opposing counsel states that Ms. Jenkins became aware of the account approximately 8 months ago. Correct, Cameron replied. Rebecca nodded. Then she pointed toward another document, a separate filing attached to the motion. Is that still your position today? It is. Again, Rebecca nodded. The narrator could see what she was doing. Not attacking, building. One fact at a time, one step at a time. A structure, a foundation. The same way Elliot might inspect a building before identifying the weak beam. Thank you, Rebecca said. She turned toward the judge. Because the date creates a problem. The room became slightly quieter. Cameron remained seated, confident, or at least appearing confident. Rebecca continued. Several records submitted by the moving party appear inconsistent with that timeline. Cameron stood immediately. Objection. Basis so. Counsel is characterizing evidence. Judge Holloway considered the objection for a moment, then shook her head. Overruled. Rebecca continued. Your Honor, I am not characterizing anything. She lifted a document. I'm comparing dates. This distinction mattered. Facts are difficult to argue with. Opinions are easier. Rebecca understood the difference. She displayed an email on the courtroom monitor. Nothing dramatic, no shocking language, no confession, just a standard communication. Professional, brief, dated. The email referenced financial disclosures exchanged during the divorce process. Rebecca allowed everyone several seconds to read it. Then she pointed toward the timestamp. 2 years and 3 months ago. Judge Holloway leaned forward slightly. Not much. Just enough for Elliot to notice. Meanwhile, Cameron remained expressionless, at least externally. The narrator could see Elliot watching carefully. Years earlier, he might have missed subtle changes. Not anymore. Experience teaches observation, and observation reveals details. Rebecca moved to the next document. Another email, another date, another reference to financial records. Again, nothing dramatic. Yet each piece pushed the timeline further away from the claim inside the motion. Rebecca never raised her voice, never became emotional. She simply continued placing facts beside other facts, one after another. By the time she finished, a pattern had emerged. Not proof, not yet, but a pattern. And judges notice patterns, especially when dates stop aligning. Judge Holloway reviewed her notes, then looked toward Cameron. Counselor. Cameron stood smoothly. The existence of communications does not establish adequate disclosure. A reasonable response, perhaps even a strong one. Rebecca expected it. So did Elliot. The argument wasn't really about emails. The emails merely established context. The real battle remained ahead. Cameron continued. Receiving documents is not the same as understanding them. Again, reasonable. Again, difficult to dispute. The courtroom remained attentive, because everyone sensed something important approaching. Not yet, But soon, the discussion shifted toward the investment account itself. Statements appeared on the screen. Several transfer records followed, then transaction histories. The financial information looked complicated, dense, confusing. Exactly the kind of material many people ignore. Rebecca began asking questions. Simple questions. Precise questions. Questions involving dates, account numbers, reference codes. Each answer created another small problem for Cameron's timeline. Not fatal problems, not individually, but enough to attract attention. The narrator could see Judge Holloway writing more frequently now. That mattered. Judges rarely write notes when bored. They write when something interests them or concerns them. Eventually, Rebecca approached a specific exhibit, one attached by Vanessa's own legal team. The document contained a reference number, an account identifier. Nothing remarkable, unless someone happened to recognize it. Rebecca did. So did Elliot. And unfortunately, for Cameron, Judge Holloway was beginning to. Rebecca pointed toward the exhibit. This account number appears familiar. Cameron immediately stood. It should. It's the account at issue. Exactly. Rebecca smiled slightly. Only slightly. Then she turned toward the judge. And that creates another problem. The room became quiet again. Several observers leaned forward. Even the court reporter glanced up. People could feel momentum shifting. Not dramatically, gradually, like a door beginning to open. Judge Holloway folded her hands. What problem? Rebecca paused. Timing mattered. The next sentence needed room to land. Because the same account number appears in documents exchanged before the settlement was finalized. The statement lingered. Not explosive, but significant. Very significant. Cameron stood immediately. Objection. Judge Holloway looked at him. On what basis? Cameron hesitated. Just for a second. The hesitation was small, yet Elliot noticed it. Rebecca noticed it too, and likely the judge. Finally, Cameron answered. Foundation. Rebecca nodded. Fair enough. Then she returned to counsel table. Not frustrated. Prepared. Because she knew exactly where this was going. The account number had now entered the discussion. Publicly. Officially. No longer theoretical. No longer abstract. Everyone understood the importance. If the account appeared inside prior disclosures, the motion faced a serious problem. A very serious problem. Judge Holloway reviewed several pages, then addressed Rebecca. Do you have documentation supporting that statement? The question changed everything. Not because it was unexpected, because it arrived sooner than anticipated. Rebecca answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Then I would like to see it. Silence followed. The kind of silence unique to courtrooms. Not dramatic, not loud, just focused. Every person in the room understood what came next. Evidence. Actual evidence. Not arguments, not interpretations. Evidence. Rebecca glanced toward Elliot. Only briefly. But the glance carried meaning. The moment had arrived. Elliot understood. For months, perhaps years, he had protected records without knowing whether they would ever matter. Now they mattered. The narrator could see him reach down toward the old leather briefcase beside his chair. Slowly. Calmly. No rush. No performance. Just movement. His fingers touched the worn handle. The leather felt smooth from years of use. Across the room, Cameron watched carefully. Judge Holloway watched too. So did every observer seated behind the railing. Because suddenly the hearing no longer revolved around accusations. It revolved around documentation, and documentation is far less flexible than memory. Elliot opened the briefcase. Inside rested several folders, a binder, and beneath them all sat something much simpler, a worn manila envelope, the same envelope he had preserved for more than 2 years. The same envelope Rebecca had asked about the day the motion arrived. The same envelope containing the acknowledgement nobody considered important when it was signed. Rebecca extended her hand. Elliot looked at the envelope for a brief moment, then handed it to her. The room remained silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Judge Holloway watched the exchange carefully, because whatever sat inside that envelope had suddenly become the most important item in the courtroom, and within minutes everyone would understand why. The manila envelope looked unimpressive. That was the first thing most people noticed. No official seal, no bold label, no thick stack of papers spilling from its edges. Just a worn envelope that had spent more than 2 years sitting inside a fireproof box. Yet as Rebecca Carter carried it toward the podium, the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, the way air changes before a storm arrives. Judge Margaret Holloway watched closely. So did Cameron Reed. So did Vanessa. And so did Elliot Jenkins. The narrator could see what Elliot was feeling. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something simpler. Certainty. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what exists inside a file. Rebecca placed the envelope on the podium, then carefully removed its contents. No theatrical gestures, no dramatic pauses, just organization. Page after page emerged, neatly preserved, protected, indexed. Judge Holloway extended her hand. "May I see the original? Of course, Your Honor." Rebecca walked the first document to the bench. The judge accepted it, adjusted her glasses, and began reading. The courtroom became unusually quiet, even by courtroom standards. Several attorneys seated in the audience leaned forward. Observers stopped shifting in their seats. People sensed something important, not because they knew what the document contained, because the judge was reading it differently than she had read everything else, more slowly, more carefully. Rebecca returned to counsel table. She waited. The silence stretched. 30 seconds, 45, nearly a minute. No one interrupted. Finally, Judge Holloway looked up. "What exactly is this document?" Rebecca answered immediately. "A post-settlement acknowledgement executed by both parties." Cameron rose. His expression remained controlled. "Your Honor, I object to any implication that a supplemental acknowledgement resolves the issues before the court." Judge Holloway glanced toward him. "Sit down, counselor." The response was calm, not hostile, yet Cameron sat immediately. That alone drew attention. The judge returned to the document. Again she read. Again she made notes. The narrator could see Elliot studying the room. Not Vanessa, not Cameron, the judge. Years of experience had taught him something useful. The judge was the only audience that mattered. Everyone else was noise. Judge Holloway reached the second page, then the third, then a fourth attachment. Each page appeared to increase her interest. Eventually, she addressed Rebecca again. "Walk me through this." Rebecca nodded. She'd been waiting for that invitation. The attorney approached the podium. "This acknowledgement was executed on August 14th, 2 years ago." She pointed toward the signature block. "Approximately 3 weeks before final settlement approval." Judge Holloway nodded. Rebecca continued. "It confirms that both parties received financial disclosures." She pointed toward another paragraph. "It confirms both parties reviewed those disclosures." Another paragraph. "It confirms neither party requested additional information." Another paragraph. "It confirms specific account schedules attached as exhibits." The judge turned pages, reviewing each reference, checking each citation, matching each attachment. Exactly what Rebecca expected, because the strength of the document wasn't one statement, it was consistency. Every page connected to another page. Every exhibit connected to another exhibit. Every date matched. Every reference aligned. The structure mattered. Good records create their own credibility. Rebecca continued. "The acknowledgement was notarized." She pointed toward the seal. "The signatures were witnessed." She pointed toward the certification. "The exhibits were attached at execution." She pointed toward exhibit references. Again, and again, and again. The documentation formed a chain that would become difficult to break. Cameron stood, this time more quickly. "Your Honor, acknowledgement of disclosure doesn't necessarily establish adequate understanding. Reasonable, strategic, expected." Judge Holloway nodded slightly. A fair point. For the first time in several minutes, Cameron appeared encouraged. Then the judge continued, "But that's not what I'm looking at." The encouragement disappeared. The courtroom grew still again. Judge Holloway lifted one specific page. "This is what I'm looking at." She held up an exhibit attachment. The page appeared ordinary. Numbers, account references, financial schedules, nothing dramatic. Yet Rebecca immediately recognized it. So did Elliot. The account schedule. The exact schedule Cameron had spent the entire morning claiming was never disclosed. Judge Holloway adjusted the page under the courtroom lights, then looked toward Cameron. "Counselor?" Cameron stood. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge tapped the exhibit. "Is this the account referenced in your motion?" Silence. Very brief, but noticeable. Cameron approached, accepted a copy, reviewed it. The narrator could see the first genuine discomfort appearing. Not panic, not yet. Discomfort, because the account number was there, clearly, unmistakably, printed in black ink. The same number cited throughout the motion, the same number discussed throughout the hearing, the same number allegedly hidden. Yet here it was, attached to a disclosure schedule signed years earlier. Cameron reviewed the page longer than necessary. Judge Holloway waited. Finally, he answered. "It appears similar." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Similar?" Rebecca said nothing. She didn't need to. The account number spoke for itself. Judge Holloway compared documents, one from the motion, one from the acknowledgement. Then she compared them again. The silence felt heavier now. Several observers exchanged glances. Something important was happening. Everyone could feel it. The narrative introduced that morning was beginning to fracture. Not collapse, fracture. Judge Holloway returned her attention to Cameron. "Is it the same account?" This time the answer took longer, several seconds. Then, "Yes." The word landed hard, not because it was dramatic, because it was unavoidable. The judge nodded once, then made another note. Across the room, Elliot remained motionless. The narrator could see what made him different from many litigants. He wasn't watching for victory. He was watching for accuracy. The account had either been disclosed or it hadn't. Nothing else mattered. Rebecca resumed her explanation. She guided the court through additional pages, supporting schedules, asset summaries, reference indexes, each one connected to the same disclosure package. Each one reinforced the same conclusion. The account existed, and it had been disclosed. The room no longer felt uncertain. The direction of the hearing was changing. Slowly, steadily, like a ship altering course. Then Rebecca introduced another page, one most people would have overlooked. A distribution summary, simple, routine, administrative. Judge Holloway studied it carefully, then looked up. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened slightly. The narrator could see it. So could Rebecca. Judges often reveal decisions before they announce them. Not through words, through attention. And Judge Holloway was paying very close attention now. The judge flipped back several pages, then forward, then back again, reviewing dates, comparing signatures, examining references. The courtroom remained silent. No one interrupted. No one dared. Finally, Judge Holloway stopped turning pages. Her finger rested on a single line of text. One sentence, one confirmation, one acknowledgement, the exact line Rebecca had hoped she would notice. The judge read it again, then once more. When she finally looked up, her attention settled directly on Cameron Reed. The expression on her face hadn't changed, yet something about the room felt different, because everyone sensed the same thing. The hearing had reached a turning point, and whatever Judge Holloway had just found on that page was significant enough to stop her from looking at anything else. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Inside courtroom 4B's silence had become more persuasive than any argument presented that morning. Judge Margaret Holloway continued staring at the page resting before her. One finger remained pressed against a specific paragraph, the paragraph that had changed everything. The narrator could see what Elliot Jenkins noticed immediately. The judge was no longer reviewing the document. She had finished reviewing it. Now she was evaluating its implications. Those were two very different things. Across the courtroom, Cameron Reed remained standing, waiting, watching, trying to determine exactly what the judge had found. Rebecca Carter already knew. She had read that paragraph dozens of times, perhaps hundreds. That was why she insisted the acknowledgement be preserved. Not because it was dramatic, because it was precise, and precision survives where memory fails. Finally, Judge Holloway looked up. "Counselor Reed." Her voice remained calm, measured, professional, yet the room felt noticeably colder. "Yes, Your Honor?" The judge lifted the document slightly. "This acknowledgement contains the signature of Ms. Vanessa Jenkins." "Yes." "The notarization appears valid." "Yes." "The execution date is uncontested." Cameron hesitated, only briefly. "Correct." Judge Holloway nodded. Then she turned another page. The referenced exhibits were attached at signing. Another pause. Another answer Cameron clearly did not enjoy giving. "Yes." Each confirmation narrowed the available arguments. Each answer reduced flexibility. That was the danger of good documentation. It leaves little room for imagination. Judge Holloway returned to the paragraph, then read it aloud, not dramatically, simply, clearly. The courtroom listened. "I acknowledge that I have received, reviewed, and voluntarily accepted all financial disclosures attached hereto, including investment account schedules and supporting asset summaries." The words settled over the room. Simple words, straightforward words, yet devastating ones, because they directly contradicted the foundation of the motion. The judge continued reading. "I further affirm that no additional financial information has been requested by me, and that I enter this acknowledgement voluntarily after sufficient opportunity for review." Another silence followed, longer this time. The narrator could see observers beginning to understand. Even people unfamiliar with legal procedure recognized the significance. The motion claimed lack of disclosure. The acknowledgement confirmed receipt and review. Those positions could not comfortably exist together. Judge Holloway set the page down, then turned toward Cameron. "Help me understand something." The request sounded polite. Experienced attorneys know that polite questions from judges are often the most dangerous. Cameron approached the podium. "What would you like clarified, Your Honor?" The judge tapped the document. "Your motion states Ms. Jenkins was unaware of the account." "Correct." "This acknowledgement states she reviewed the account schedule." A pause, then, "Yes." Judge Holloway folded her hands. "Both statements cannot be true." The sentence landed harder than any objection, harder than any exhibit, because it came directly from the bench. For the first time that day, Cameron appeared genuinely uncomfortable. Not defeated, not yet, but uncomfortable. The narrator could see him searching for language, searching for space, searching for a way around the contradiction. Eventually, he found one, or tried to. "Your Honor, our position is not that the document doesn't exist." Judge Holloway waited. "Our position is that acknowledgement does not necessarily establish meaningful understanding. A reasonable attempt, perhaps the only attempt available." The judge considered it, then looked back at the document. "And yet this acknowledgement specifically references the account." No response. The judge continued. "It references the account by exhibit." Still no response. "It references supporting schedules." Silence. "It references disclosures." More silence. Then Judge Holloway asked a question that shifted the entire hearing. "Was this document disclosed in your motion?" Cameron blinked. Just once. But Elliot noticed. The narrator could see Rebecca notice too, because the answer mattered. A lot. "No, Your Honor." The courtroom became very still. The judge looked down at her notes, then back toward Cameron. "Why not?" A simple question, a difficult one, because there was no obvious answer. If the acknowledgement existed, it was relevant. If it was relevant, it should have appeared, especially in a motion alleging non-disclosure. The pause lasted several seconds. Finally, Cameron answered. "We did not consider it controlling." Judge Holloway's expression did not change, But she wrote something. That worried Cameron more than any visible reaction would have. The judge then turned toward Rebecca. "When did your office first provide this acknowledgement to opposing counsel?" Rebecca answered immediately. "More than 21 months ago." Judge Holloway looked up. "Excuse me." Rebecca opened a binder, removed a page, and approached the bench. "This is the certified transmission record." The judge reviewed it. Date, time, delivery confirmation, receipt acknowledgement, everything documented, everything preserved. The narrator could see the pieces aligning, not dramatically, methodically, like a puzzle finally revealing its image. Judge Holloway studied the transmission record, then compared it with the acknowledgement, then reviewed another page, then another. Each comparison reinforced the same conclusion. The document existed. The document had been delivered. The document had been received. Nothing appeared missing. Nothing appeared hidden. Rebecca remained silent. She didn't need to argue. The documents were arguing for her. Meanwhile, Elliot sat quietly at counsel table. The room around him seemed distant, muted. He wasn't thinking about winning. He wasn't thinking about Vanessa. He wasn't even thinking about the motion anymore. He was thinking about a conversation from years earlier, the day Rebecca handed him a copy of the acknowledgement. "You keep everything," she had said. "Even after the divorce. Especially after the divorce." At the time, he thought she was being overly cautious. Now he understood. Some records spend years appearing worthless, then suddenly become priceless. Judge Holloway flipped to another attachment. This one was an email, a short one, no more than 2 paragraphs. The judge read it carefully, then once again. Finally, she looked up. "Counselor Reed." The tone had changed, only slightly, but enough. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge held up the email. "This appears to be from Ms. Jenkins." "It does." "It references review of disclosures." "Yes." "It references investment schedules." A pause. "Yes." "It references settlement terms." Another pause. "Yes." The judge set the email down, then removed her glasses. A small gesture, yet everyone noticed, because judges often remove glasses when they have finished reading. The room waited. Even the air felt still. Then Cameron attempted one final pivot. "Your Honor." Even if disclosures existed, parties sometimes fail to understand complex financial records. Judge Holloway raised one hand. The motion stopped him immediately. Not harshly, not dramatically, just firmly. The courtroom became silent again. The judge looked directly at Cameron, then at the acknowledgement, then at the email, then at the certified delivery record, and finally at the account schedule. When she spoke, her voice remained calm, but every person in the room understood the significance of what came next. Because Judge Holloway had reached a conclusion, or very nearly reached one, and before the hearing continued any further, she wanted to see whether one final piece of evidence confirmed what the documents already suggested. Judge Margaret Holloway did not speak immediately. Instead, she looked down at the documents again, slowly, carefully, as if confirming what she already suspected, but still needed to verify one last time. The courtroom remained completely still. Even Cameron Reed had stopped moving. Beside him, Vanessa Jenkins sat rigid, her expression controlled but less confident than before. Across the room, Elliot Jenkins remained motionless, not tense, not relaxed, simply present. Rebecca Carter stood near the podium waiting. She knew this moment. Every experienced attorney did. There is a point in certain hearings where the facts stop being debated and start being processed. Judge Holloway reached for a separate sheet attached to the acknowledgement packet. She read it. Then she read it again. This time she did not look away immediately. Her eyes stayed on the page longer than before. Then she turned slightly toward Rebecca. "Counselor Carter." "Yes, Your Honor." "This attachment." The judge tapped the paper lightly. "It lists the investment account in question as an attached exhibit at the time of execution." "Yes, Your Honor." Cameron immediately stood. "Your Honor, I need to object." "One moment, Counselor Reed." The judge did not raise her voice, But the interruption stopped him instantly. She continued reading. The courtroom felt tighter now, smaller. Every word mattered. Every pause mattered more. Judge Holloway looked back at Rebecca. This means the account was explicitly included in the disclosure package signed by both parties. Rebecca did not hesitate. Yes. Another silence. The judge leaned back slightly in her chair. Not relaxed, reflective. Then she asked the question that changed the energy in the room again. Counselor Reed, are you suggesting this document is inaccurate? Cameron adjusted his stance. Careful now. Measured. Your Honor, we are not disputing the existence of the document. We are disputing its interpretation and its legal effect. A safe answer. A lawyer's answer. Judge Holloway nodded slowly. Then she placed the document flat on the bench. And yet the motion before me is based on the assertion that Ms. Jenkins was unaware of this account at the time of settlement. Correct. Cameron's voice was firmer this time. That is our position. The judge looked down again. This time she did not take long. She picked up the acknowledgement packet and turned several pages quickly, not rushing, reviewing. Then she stopped at a section highlighted in the margin. Rebecca noticed immediately. So did Elliot. So did Cameron. The judge read aloud. I confirm that I have received and reviewed all financial disclosures, including all investment accounts listed in Exhibit C prior to execution of the final settlement agreement. She paused, then looked up. Is Exhibit C the same exhibit that includes the account referenced in your motion? Cameron hesitated again, only briefly. Yes, Your Honor. The answer landed differently this time. He had stopped trying to avoid direct confirmation. That alone told the room everything it needed to know. Judge Holloway closed the document slowly, then placed it back on the bench. When she spoke, her tone remained even. But something in the room shifted again, because now the judge was no longer asking questions. She was summarizing reality. The record reflects that the disputed account was included in the disclosure exhibits. She paused. Correct. No one spoke immediately. Then Rebecca answered. Correct, Your Honor. The judge nodded once, then turned toward Cameron. The record also reflects that Ms. Jenkins acknowledged receipt and review of those exhibits prior to signing the settlement. Another pause. Correct? Cameron looked down for a brief moment, then responded. That is what the document states. The wording was careful, but it was enough. Judge Holloway leaned forward slightly. Her hands rested on the bench. Then help me understand the basis for alleging concealment. The question was simple, but it carried weight, because it removed interpretation. It demanded logic. Cameron began slowly. Your Honor, our argument is that the disclosure was not reasonably comprehended at the time of execution. A familiar argument, used often in financial disputes, but this time it landed differently, because the judge was no longer focused on ambiguity. She was focused on contradiction. Rebecca stepped forward slightly. Your Honor, may I respond? The judge nodded. Proceed. Rebecca opened a small folder. Inside was a single printed page. She placed it on the podium. This is the email confirmation sent by Ms. Jenkins one day before execution of the settlement. She pointed to the screen as it displayed the document. She states, I confirm I have reviewed all attached financial disclosures and understand the settlement structure. Rebecca paused, then added one more line. That language mirrors the acknowledgement document verbatim. The courtroom absorbed that. Slowly, Vanessa shifted slightly in her seat for the first time, barely noticeable. But Elliot saw it. The narrator noted it. Judge Holloway reviewed the email carefully, then compared it with the acknowledgement again. Then with Exhibit C, 3 documents, 3 independent confirmations, all pointing in the same direction. She placed the papers down, then exhaled slowly, not dramatically, just enough to signal she had reached a conclusion. The courtroom understood that sound. Cameron understood it immediately. Rebecca did as well. Elliot remained still. The judge finally spoke. The motion before this court alleges that Ms. Jenkins was unaware of a specific investment account at the time of settlement. She paused, then looked directly at Cameron Reed. The record does not support that allegation. Silence hit the room immediately. Not loud, not explosive. Final. Cameron stood slowly. Your Honor, Judge Holloway raised a hand. No. One word. No force, no anger, just closure. She continued. The court finds that the investment account was properly disclosed, documented, and acknowledged prior to execution of the settlement agreement. Another pause. The motion to reopen settlement is therefore denied. The words were calm, but they ended the argument instantly. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. Even the court reporter paused briefly before continuing to type. Cameron sat down slowly. Not defeated in a dramatic sense, but in a procedural one. The argument had no remaining structure. Vanessa did not speak. She simply stared at the documents on the table. Across the room, Elliot remained seated. No expression of victory, no visible relief, just stillness. Rebecca closed her folder, carefully, as if the matter were now physically complete. Judge Holloway reviewed one final note, then looked up. Counselors, I would advise both parties that the court expects all future filings in this matter to be consistent with the record as established today. A final warning, not necessary, but formal. Then she added something else. Mischaracterization of disclosed information in post-settlement motions is not taken lightly by this court. Cameron nodded once. Understood, Your Honor. The judge gathered her papers, then looked once more at Elliot. Not long, just a brief glance. Then she said, We are adjourned. The gavel came down, soft, controlled, final. Courtroom 4B slowly came back to movement. Chairs shifted. People stood. Whispers began immediately. Attorneys gathered their files quickly. Some left without speaking. Others lingered to process what they had just witnessed. But for Elliot Jenkins, the hearing had already ended the moment the judge spoke her final ruling. Rebecca walked beside him as they exited the courtroom. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Rebecca broke the silence. You handled that exactly right. Elliot adjusted his grip on the briefcase. I didn't do much. Rebecca gave a faint smile. That's not true. They stepped into the courthouse hallway. The noise of the building returned. Footsteps, conversations, phones ringing, life resuming. Rebecca stopped walking. So, she said, it's over. Elliot looked down the hallway, then nodded once. Yes. No celebration, no relief speech, no dramatic reaction, just confirmation. Behind them, inside courtroom 4B, the documents remained on the bench. Paper evidence, quiet, unchanging, exactly as Elliot had kept them for years, and exactly as they had finally proven what he had always believed. Facts do not need noise to win. They only need time. The courthouse steps were damp from a light morning drizzle. Elliot Jenkins paused at the top for a moment, briefcase hanging at his side. Below him, Des Moines traffic moved as if nothing had happened inside courtroom 4B. That contrast felt almost unreal. Inside the building, a legal challenge that could have dragged on for years had ended in a single ruling. Outside, people were buying coffee, checking phones, arguing over parking spots. Normal life continued without interruption. Rebecca Carter stepped beside him. She closed her file folder with a soft snap. It's done, she said again, as if repeating it would make it more real. Elliot nodded once, not because he was uncertain, because he was confirming something he had already accepted before leaving the courtroom. Vanessa's motion had not failed due to technicality. It had failed because it conflicted with a documented record that could not be dismantled. The acknowledgement packet had done something arguments could not. It removed ambiguity. Rebecca adjusted her coat. You should know something, she said. Elliot turned slightly. Your testimony didn't matter today. He gave a faint, almost dry look. I didn't testify. Exactly, she replied. That's what mattered. They walked down the courthouse steps together. Rebecca continued. People expected this to be a credibility case. It wasn't. It became a documentation case. Elliot said nothing. He had already understood that. In his world, credibility could shift. Memories could blur. People could reinterpret events over time, but signed documents did not shift. That was the difference. Rebecca stopped near the sidewalk. "I've seen cases like this before," she said, "but not many where one side preserves everything this meticulously." Elliot glanced at the briefcase in his hand. "I didn't preserve it for this." Rebecca studied him. "Most people don't preserve things unless they expect conflict." "I didn't expect conflict," he said. "I expected confusion." That distinction mattered more than it sounded. Confusion was not dramatic. It was subtle, slow, often invisible until it became a problem. Rebecca gave a slight nod. "Either way, it saved you." Elliot didn't respond, because in his mind, nothing had been saved. Nothing had been won. Something had simply been clarified. Across the street, a city bus pulled up to a stop. People boarded without looking at the courthouse. Inside that building, something had just ended for him. Outside, nothing changed. That imbalance felt strange, but not uncomfortable. Elliot had lived most of his life in systems where work continued regardless of recognition. Buildings didn't care who fixed them. Machines didn't care who repaired them. Truth didn't care who delivered it. Rebecca checked her watch. "I need to head back to the office." She hesitated slightly, then added, "You should take the rest of the day off." Elliot gave a small shake of his head. "I've got a broken HVAC unit at the Civic Center." Rebecca gave him a look that was half amusement, half disbelief. "You just ended a court case. And now I fix HVAC units." That was the end of it. No debate, no emotional reflection, just continuity. Rebecca exhaled. "You're not going to celebrate, are you?" Elliot considered the question for a moment. "I don't think there's anything to celebrate." She tilted her head. "You won." He looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "The record won." Rebecca didn't argue, because she understood exactly what he meant. They parted near the intersection. Rebecca walked toward her car, Elliot toward his truck. Neither looked back. By mid-afternoon, Elliot was back inside the Polk County Civic Center. The building smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and old ventilation systems. A maintenance report had flagged inconsistent cooling in the north wing. On any other day, that would have been the priority. Today was no different. He checked the control panel, reset the system, reviewed airflow readings, replaced a worn filter. Normal tasks, familiar tasks, tasks that required attention, not emotion. Around 3:15 p.m., one of his co-workers, Brian McCall, approached him near the mechanical room. Brian looked different than he had a few days earlier. More hesitant, less certain. "Hey," Brian said carefully. Elliot didn't look up from the panel. "Hey." A pause. Then Brian spoke again. "So, I heard it's over." Elliot tightened a screw on the unit. "Yes." Another pause. "You good?" Elliot considered the question. It was a common one, but not always a useful one. "I'm fine," he said. Brian nodded slowly. "You know people are talking." Elliot finally looked at him. "About what?" Brian shifted his weight. "About the whole thing. The court case, the money, the accusation." Elliot returned his attention to the panel. "People always talk." Brian hesitated again. "Some of them thought you were hiding something." Elliot didn't react. "And now?" Brian gave a half shrug. "Now they don't know what to think." That Elliot understood was often the final stage of these situations. Confusion replacing assumption. Uncertainty replacing rumor. Not clarity for everyone, just correction. He closed the panel. "Let them think what they want," he said. Brian watched him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough," and walked away. Elliot remained in the mechanical room. The hum of the HVAC system filled the space. Constant, steady, predictable. He preferred it that way. That evening, Elliot returned to his apartment earlier than usual. The sky outside was turning dark blue. Streetlights flickered on one by one. He set the briefcase on the kitchen table, did not open it, did not lock it away immediately, just left it there. After a moment, he made coffee. Black, no sugar, no distractions. Then he sat at the table across from the briefcase. For a long time, he simply looked at it, not because he needed to, because he could. The case no longer felt heavy, not because it contained less, but because its purpose had been fulfilled. The documents inside were no longer warnings, no longer protection, no longer preparation. They were history. After nearly an hour, his phone rang. He checked the caller ID. Daniel Jenkins. He answered. "Hey." "Hey." Daniel's voice came through lighter than usual. "I heard what happened." Elliot didn't respond immediately. "Small city," he said finally. Daniel laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess." A pause. Then Daniel added, "You okay?" Elliot looked at the briefcase again. "I'm fine." Daniel didn't press further. He never did. Instead, he shifted tone slightly. "You still coming to the game next weekend?" Elliot paused, then nodded even though Daniel couldn't see it. "Yes." "Good," Daniel said. "Don't miss it." "I won't." After the call ended, Elliot remained seated. The apartment was quiet. No tension, no noise, no legal weight hanging in the air. Just ordinary silence, the kind he had always preferred. He finally opened the briefcase, removed the manila envelope, looked at it for a moment, then placed it back inside, closed the case, and slid it back into the closet. Not locked away in secrecy, just stored, no longer urgent, no longer active. Then he turned off the kitchen light, and for the first time in a long time he didn't think about what might come next, because nothing needed to be prepared for anymore, at least not today. The days after the hearing did not feel like an ending. They felt like something had simply stopped pressing against Elliot Jenkins. No celebration followed, no sudden change in routine, no dramatic shift in behavior, just space, empty space where pressure used to exist. At the Polk County Civic Center, life continued as usual. Work orders still printed at 600 a.m. Elevators still broke down without warning. HVAC systems still failed in unpredictable ways. Elliot still arrived early, still left late, still fixed what needed fixing. But something subtle had changed in how people looked at him. Not everyone, not openly, but enough to notice. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when he entered rooms. People who once assumed he was financially insignificant now hesitated before joking about it. Assumptions had not disappeared. They had simply become cautious. Elliot never addressed it, never corrected anyone, never explained the hearing, because explanations often invite more questions than clarity. Rebecca Carter called him once that week. "Media inquiry came in," she said. Elliot paused. "What media?" "Local legal blog, nothing major." And, "I declined comment on your behalf." Good. That was the end of the conversation. Neither of them saw a need to expand it. The case legally was closed. Socially, it was still settling. That was how things often worked. Truth arrives quickly in court. It spreads slowly outside of it. On the following Saturday, Elliot drove to a small hardware store on the edge of Des Moines, the same store he had visited for years. The owner nodded when he entered. Didn't mention the case, didn't mention anything, just greeted him normally. That mattered more than people realized. Normality, once disrupted, is rarely restored instantly. Elliot picked up supplies for a minor repair job at the Civic Center. Nothing important, just routine maintenance. But as he stood in the aisle selecting parts, he noticed someone watching him, a man he vaguely recognized, a former acquaintance from Vanessa's professional circle. The man hesitated, then approached. "Elliot?" "Yes." A pause, then the man shifted uncomfortably. "I just wanted to say, I heard about the court thing." Elliot didn't respond immediately. He waited. The man continued. "Guess it turned out differently than people expected." Elliot picked up a box of fittings. "It turned out based on documents," he said simply. The man nodded quickly. "Right, yeah." Another pause. Then he added, "People talk a lot without knowing everything." Elliot looked at him. That happens. The man seemed relieved by the neutrality of the response. Well, anyway, good luck. He left quickly after that. Elliot remained in the aisle for a moment longer, not thinking about the conversation, just observing it. Human behavior rarely changed his decisions, but it often confirmed patterns he already understood. 2 weeks later, Vanessa Jenkins attempted to contact him. Not through Rebecca, not through attorneys, directly. The message arrived as a short email. No subject line of importance, just a request to speak. Elliot read it once, then a second time, then closed the laptop. He did not respond, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because the system had already spoken, and he had no interest in reopening what had been closed by evidence. Rebecca called later that evening. I assume you saw it, she said. Yes. Do you want me to respond? Elliot considered it, then answered. No. Rebecca did not argue. Instead, she said something unexpected. That's probably the right decision. Elliot looked out the window of his apartment. Streetlights were just beginning to turn on. I'm not interested in revisiting it, he said. Good, Rebecca replied, because it's already been revisited in the only place that matters. The court. Exactly. There was a pause. Then she added, most cases don't end that cleanly. Elliot understood what she meant. Many disputes linger. They echo. They mutate. They return in different forms. This one had not, because it had been built on documentation strong enough to prevent reinterpretation. Inside the Civic Center, Elliot resumed his normal responsibilities, but there was a noticeable change in how he was approached. Supervisors assigned him complex repairs more often. Coworkers asked for his input on technical issues they previously solved themselves, not because his role had changed, but because perception had shifted. One afternoon, Brian McCall stopped him near the maintenance office. You ever think about leaving? Brian asked. Elliot looked at him. Leaving where? Here. Work. Everything. After all this. Elliot shook his head. No. Brian frowned slightly. You don't want something different? Elliot considered the question seriously, then answered. I already have what I need. Brian seemed unsure how to respond. After a moment, he nodded and walked away. Elliot understood the confusion. People often assumed external events created internal desires, but for him, stability mattered more than change, especially after instability. One evening, Daniel Jenkins visited his apartment. He arrived carrying groceries, without announcement, without formality. You still eat like a machine? Daniel asked. Elliot gave a faint look. I eat normally. Daniel laughed. You eat the same thing every day. Elliot didn't deny it. They cooked together in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable silence. Familiar silence. Eventually, Daniel spoke. So, you really didn't hide anything? Elliot looked at him. No. Daniel nodded slowly. I figured. Why, because it didn't make sense. That answer mattered. Elliot understood logic when he heard it. Daniel continued. People just like simple stories. Good guy, bad guy. Money secrets. Drama. Elliot stirred food in a pan. Real life is usually just paperwork. Daniel smiled. That might be the most boring thing I've ever heard. Elliot nodded. It probably is. But neither of them seemed bothered by that. Months passed. Then the seasons shifted again. Winter gave way to spring. Spring to early summer. The case faded from daily conversation. Not forgotten, just no longer active. At the Civic Center, maintenance requests became predictable again. At home, Elliot's routine stabilized further. Coffee, work, repairs, quiet evenings, occasional visits from Daniel. Once in a while, a passing mention of the hearing surfaced in conversation around town. Each time, Elliot responded the same way. Briefly, directly, without emotion. Because emotion had never been the foundation of the outcome. Evidence had. And evidence once established did not require reinforcement. One late afternoon, Elliot stood on the roof of the Civic Center, checking an air circulation unit. The wind was light, city noise distant. He tightened a panel screw and paused. From that height, Des Moines looked ordinary, unremarkable. People moving through intersections, cars waiting at lights, buildings reflecting afternoon sun, life continuing without awareness of past courtroom arguments. He thought briefly about the hearing, not the conflict, not the accusations, but the silence afterward. The silence that followed Judge Holloway's ruling. That silence had felt different, not empty, resolved. He finished the inspection, closed the panel, and began walking back toward the stairwell. No sense of victory followed him, no sense of loss either, just continuity. Because for Elliot Jenkins, the outcome had never been about winning against someone. It had been about ensuring that what was true could not be rewritten, and now it couldn't. The morning was quiet in a way that felt almost deliberate. Elliot Jenkins stood on his apartment balcony, holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone slightly cold. Below him, Des Moines moved at its usual pace, cars turning at intersections, people walking with phones in their hands, a city functioning without awareness of any past courtroom battles. Nothing about the world looked different, and yet everything felt lighter. Not because anything external had changed again, but because nothing was pressing against him anymore. The case was over, not emotionally, legally, which mattered more. Inside the apartment, the briefcase still sat where he had left it weeks earlier, closed, untouched, not hidden, just unnecessary now. Elliot took another sip of coffee and leaned slightly against the railing. The wind moved gently across the balcony. No urgency, no tension, just air. Later that morning, he met Daniel Jenkins at a small diner off Ingersoll Avenue. The place had red vinyl booths and old ceiling fans that moved slower than they should have. Daniel was already there when Elliot arrived. He had ordered coffee and a plate of pancakes. "You're late," Daniel said. "I'm on time," Elliot replied. Daniel smirked. "That's what you always say." They ate for a few minutes without talking about anything important. That was normal between them. Comfortable silence had always been part of their relationship. Finally, Daniel spoke. "So, what now?" Elliot looked at him. "Now?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, after everything. Court, Vanessa, all of it." Elliot set his fork down. He considered the question carefully, not because the answer was complicated, but because it was simple. "Nothing changes," he said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's it." Elliot nodded. "That's it." Daniel leaned back slightly. "You went through all that, just to go back to normal." Elliot didn't respond immediately. Then he said something that felt honest, not rehearsed. "It was already normal. People just didn't see it clearly." Daniel studied him for a moment, then laughed quietly. "You really are the least dramatic person I know." Elliot took a sip of coffee. "I prefer it that way." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I think that's why it worked." Neither of them clarified what it meant. They didn't need to. Some things are understood without definition. After breakfast, Elliot drove back toward the Civic Center. The streets were familiar, traffic lights unchanged, buildings unchanged. The world had not adjusted itself to accommodate what had happened in court, because the world rarely does. Inside the maintenance office, everything was as expected. Work orders, equipment logs, repair schedules, a broken cooling unit on the third floor, a flickering light panel in the east corridor. Elliot picked up his tools and got to work. As he moved through the building, one of his co-workers, Brian McCall, approached him again. This time, Brian didn't hesitate. "You ever hear anything else about that case?" Brian asked. Elliot tightened a screw on a panel. "No." Brian leaned against the wall. "People still mention it sometimes." Elliot didn't look up. "People mention a lot of things." Brian nodded slowly, then added, "You handled it differently than most people would have." Elliot paused for a moment. "How so?" "You didn't react." Elliot finally looked at him. "Reactions don't change records." Brian considered that, then nodded. Yeah, I guess not. He left a moment later. Elliot returned to the panel. The system hummed steadily. Reliable. Predictable. He preferred machines that behaved that way. Weeks passed again. Then months. Eventually the case became something people rarely mentioned. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had reached its natural endpoint. There was no unresolved question left to chase. No ambiguity left to exploit. Only documentation. Complete. Final. One afternoon, Rebecca Carter called him. "It's been a while," she said. "It has," Elliot replied. "I had a client ask about your case." Elliot waited. Rebecca continued. "They were surprised how clean it ended." Elliot gave a faint sound of acknowledgement. "It didn't feel clean at the time." Rebecca laughed softly. "That's because you were inside it." A pause. Then she added, "From the outside, it looked like one of the most straightforward rulings I've seen in years." Elliot looked out his window. "I just kept records." "That's not all you did." He didn't respond. Rebecca didn't press. Instead, she said something quieter. "You know, most people underestimate how rare that is." Keeping records. Keeping discipline. Elliot considered that, then answered simply, "I wasn't trying to be rare." Rebecca smiled on the other end of the line. That's exactly why it worked. That evening, Elliot returned to his balcony again. Same view, same street, same city. But his thoughts were different. Not heavier, not lighter, just settled. He thought about Vanessa briefly. Not with anger, not with satisfaction. More like distance, as though she belonged to a version of life that no longer required attention. Some stories end loudly, others end in paperwork. His had ended in documents and silence. Both had proven enough. He looked down at the briefcase inside the apartment. Still there, still closed. He didn't open it, didn't need to, because everything inside it had already done its job. Elliot finished his coffee and set the empty cup on the railing. Then he stepped back inside, turned off the light, and locked the door behind him. Not as an ending, but as routine. The way most things in his life were meant to be. Simple, clear, unremarkable, and final. Not every victory looks like a victory when it happens. Some of the most important outcomes in life are quiet, built on preparation rather than reaction, and proven through evidence rather than emotion. Elliot's story shows something simple but often ignored. Truth doesn't need volume to survive. It only needs to be preserved accurately. When everything depends on memory, confusion wins easily. But when everything is documented clearly, time works in your favor. In real life, people are often judged quickly by appearance, by silence, by assumptions. But those judgments rarely hold up against facts that are organized, consistent, and complete. Elliot never tried to prove anything loudly. He simply made sure the truth could not be rewritten later. And sometimes that is enough. If you've ever been in a situation where you were misunderstood or underestimated, what mattered more? What you said in the moment, or what you were able to prove later? Share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoy grounded courtroom stories where patience and preparation matter more than noise, subscribe, because the next story is about someone who lost everything publicly and rebuilt it using a single overlooked receipt.